Have you ever sat quietly in your living room, coffee in hand, and wondered how a child you raised with love and sacrifice could grow into someone who makes you feel small, ignored, or even used? You remember their tiny feet running through the house, their laughter echoing down the hallway, and the way they used to look at you with complete trust. And now, somehow, they've become distant, cold, and even manipulative. If this hits close to home, you're not alone. As we age, we begin to reflect on our relationships more deeply, especially the ones with our children. We think about the time we gave, the support we offered, and the countless compromises we made. But what happens when that child, now an adult, uses guilt, gaslighting, or emotional distance as tools to get their way? What happens when the very person you nurtured becomes someone who twists your words, avoids accountability, and makes you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells? That's when we need to talk about something that's hard to admit: harmful behavioral patterns in adult children. We're not here to label anyone permanently, but if your child consistently shows signs of selfishness, manipulation, or an inability to recognize your feelings, then it's time to take a closer look at how to protect your peace and possibly help them face the consequences of their actions. In this conversation, we're going to explore practical, heartfelt ways to respond to these difficult behaviors, not with revenge, but with clarity, courage, and compassion for yourself. It won't be easy, especially when it's your own child. But you deserve a life that's filled with respect, connection, and joy, not confusion, guilt, and exhaustion. Let's begin with something simple, but powerful: living your life well and happily, with or without their approval. I know that sounds hard. After all, as parents, especially after 60, we often still feel responsible for our children's well-being. We worry if they're eating right, if they're making good choices, if they're okay without us. But here's the truth: your happiness should not be tied to whether or not your adult child treats you kindly. And if their behavior has become toxic, constantly blaming you, using you, or ignoring your boundaries, then the best thing you can do is shift your focus inward. Start by asking yourself, what makes me feel alive? Is it gardening, reading, walking with friends, traveling to that place you've always dreamed about? Begin doing more of that. When your child sees that you are no longer emotionally dependent on their approval or affection, they are forced to sit with the space you've created. That space is where reflection can happen, for both of you. You don't need to shout or send dramatic messages. Simply living your life well, with peace and fulfillment, is a powerful signal. It says, I'm no longer giving you the power to control how I feel every day. It says, I choose joy, even if you're not willing to be a part of it right now. And that, dear friend, is the beginning of something freeing. But living well is only one part of the puzzle. The next step: become a stronger, wiser version of yourself. Not to prove anything to your child, but to honor the years you've lived, the lessons you've learned, and the strength you already have inside you. Think back to a time when you overcame something hard. Maybe it was raising kids as a single parent. Maybe it was working 2 jobs, dealing with illness, or recovering from loss. Those moments built something in you: resilience. You're not weak, even if your child's words try to make you feel like you are. You're not the villain in their story, even if they say otherwise. So now is the time to revisit that inner strength. Learn something new. Take up an old hobby again. Surround yourself with people who celebrate who you are today, not just who you used to be when you were mom or dad. When your identity is rooted in your own values and passions, not in how your child treats you, you become unshakable. And believe me, that shift can shake even the most self-centered person out of their comfort zone. As you grow stronger, you may find yourself standing up more, not just emotionally, but in the way you talk, the way you carry yourself, the way you respond to manipulation. And that brings us to the next piece of this journey: daring to stand up for yourself. For many older adults, especially those who grew up in a culture of respect and obedience, speaking up to your child can feel unnatural, even wrong. You might think, if I speak up, will they stop talking to me altogether? Or, what if they think I'm just being dramatic? But silence has a cost, and often that cost is your peace. You have every right to say, "That tone doesn't work for me." You can say, "I won't continue this conversation if you're going to speak to me that way." And yes, you can walk away. That's not giving up. That's setting a boundary. Harmful behavior thrives in confusion. It feeds on guilt and grows stronger when we avoid conflict just to keep things calm. But real peace comes from honesty. From being able to say, "I love you, but I will not let you speak to me as if I don't matter." It comes from knowing you've done your part and choosing not to sacrifice your self-respect any longer. Standing up for yourself is not a rejection of your child. It's a reflection of the love you still hold for them and for yourself. It says, "I believe you can grow, but I won't shrink to make that happen." Now, as you begin to reclaim your space, you'll notice something else begin to shift: your confidence. That voice inside you that was once unsure begins to grow steadier. You don't need to second-guess your every move. You don't need to beg for affection or approval. And you certainly don't need to keep apologizing for things you didn't do wrong. That's where we'll go next. You know, it's almost automatic sometimes. The moment there's tension, the moment your adult child seems upset, you start to apologize, even when you've done nothing wrong. Maybe you say, "I'm sorry if I upset you," or "I didn't mean to hurt your feelings," even though deep down, you know you were simply being honest, or setting a healthy boundary. If that sounds familiar, take a deep breath. You're not alone. Many of us were raised to avoid conflict, especially in families where keeping the peace felt more important than speaking the truth. So we fall into the habit of apologizing just to smooth things over. And when you're dealing with a child who regularly displays self-centered or manipulative patterns, that apology can become a powerful tool for them, not for you. Here's the hard truth. When you say sorry for things you didn't do wrong, you hand over control. You allow the other person to twist the situation, to shift the blame, and to avoid taking responsibility for their behavior. It reinforces their belief that they're always right and you're always the one who needs fixing. But here's what's even more important to remember. You don't need to apologize for setting boundaries. You don't need to say sorry for asking to be treated with respect. You don't need to feel guilty for protecting your peace. And most of all, you don't need to explain yourself to someone who only listens to argue back. When your child tries to manipulate you into feeling guilty, remind yourself, your voice matters, your experience matters. You've lived through too much, seen too much, and grown through too much to let someone else rewrite your story. Instead of saying, "I'm sorry," try saying, "That's not how I experienced it," or "We see this differently." If they push harder, you can simply say, "I'm not going to argue about this." And if they accuse you of being cold or distant, remember, it's okay to pause the conversation. You don't owe anyone constant access to your emotional energy. Which leads us into something even more powerful. Choosing silence. Not silence as a punishment, but silence as protection. As peace. When you're dealing with someone who constantly drains you, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is step away. Stop engaging in arguments that go nowhere. Stop trying to explain yourself to someone who doesn't actually want to understand you. That silence. It speaks louder than words. It says, "I've tried, I've given, and now I'm choosing me." And silence doesn't have to mean cutting off all contact, although in some cases it might come to that. Silence can mean shorter phone calls. It can mean not responding to a message that's baiting you into an argument. It can mean letting that comment slide by without jumping in to defend yourself. You are not required to be someone's emotional punching bag just because you're their parent. You are allowed to say, "This conversation is no longer healthy for me," and walk away. Now, here's something surprising that happens when you embrace that kind of calm, quiet strength. The person who once tried to control the narrative suddenly doesn't know what to do. They may try harder. They may lash out more. But eventually, without your reaction to feed on, they're left with nothing but their own behavior to sit with. That's when the mirror turns back toward them. And you, well, you've already started healing. But in order to truly maintain that healing, you'll need something that holds everything else in place. Mental strength. Mental strength isn't about being tough all the time. It's not about hiding your emotions or pretending like nothing hurts. It's about knowing what you need and choosing it, even when it's hard. It's about reminding yourself that just because someone is family doesn't mean they have the right to hurt you repeatedly. Your emotional well-being matters. Your peace matters. And just because you love someone doesn't mean you have to tolerate behavior that tears you down. One way to stay mentally strong is to keep reminding yourself of the truth. Write it down if you have to. Keep a small journal or note by your bedside that says, "I am worthy of respect. I am not responsible for someone else's choices. I can love someone and still protect myself." Those little truths become anchors. On the hard days, the days when guilt starts creeping in, when that old voice says, "Maybe I'm just being too sensitive," you can return to those reminders and steady yourself. Another way to stay mentally strong: build a support circle. Maybe it's a friend you trust, a sibling, or even a support group of other parents dealing with difficult adult children. You'd be surprised how many others are facing the same struggles in silence. Talking about it doesn't make you weak, it makes you wise. It gives you perspective and strength when you need it most. As you strengthen your inner foundation, you'll begin to realize just how much power you've given away over the years, and just how much you can take back. But taking that power back doesn't mean becoming hard or cold. It means learning how to set boundaries, and mean them. Boundaries are not about control, they are about clarity. A boundary might sound like this: "I'm happy to talk when you're calm, but I won't stay on the phone if I'm being yelled at." Or, "I'm not able to help you financially this month." Or even, "I need time to think about that decision." These aren't attacks, they're choices, and they are entirely yours to make. Sometimes your child may push back. They might accuse you of being selfish, cold, or uncaring. That's okay. Their discomfort does not mean your boundary is wrong. In fact, it often means you're finally doing something right. Boundaries don't have to be shouted. They don't need to come with big speeches. They just need to be consistent, quiet, firm, loving, but unmoving. And when your child sees that the old tactics no longer work, the guilt trips, the tantrums, the manipulations, they'll be forced to face a new reality, one where their behavior has consequences. And you'll be living in a space of truth and peace that no one can take from you. Now, let's talk about something that might surprise you. What happens when you stop flattering them? When you stop feeding into their sense of superiority? You see, for many parents, there's a natural desire to encourage their children, to lift them up. You might have spent decades telling your son he was so smart, or your daughter she was so talented, hoping it would build confidence and help them feel loved. But with children who show self-centered patterns, flattery doesn't nurture humility. It often fuels entitlement. And when you continue to compliment them, even after they've hurt you, ignored your needs, or manipulated your words, you're reinforcing their belief that they can do no wrong. That you'll always bend, always forgive, always keep the spotlight on them. So what happens when you stop doing that? At first, they might get upset. They'll notice the change. Maybe they'll say something like, "You never support me anymore," or try to bait you into praising them with passive comments about their own struggles. But don't take the bait. This isn't about being cold. It's about being honest. Instead of flattery, offer truth. If they ask for your opinion, give it, but gently and without sugarcoating reality. If they fail to treat you kindly, don't reward them with affection or admiration. That doesn't mean you stop loving them. It means you stop enabling behavior that causes harm. This shift is subtle but powerful. It breaks the cycle of feeding their ego while your needs remain ignored. And in that space, where you no longer reinforce their false sense of perfection, something else begins to rise. Accountability. You create the conditions for them to reflect. And even if they don't change right away, you're no longer participating in the cycle that's held both of you hostage for years. And now, finally, we come to one of the hardest but most essential truths. You don't have to give in. You don't have to meet every demand. You don't have to say yes just because they're your child. You don't have to jump in to rescue them from every poor decision or fix every crisis they bring to your door. It's not easy. In fact, for many parents, saying no feels like a betrayal. But let me reassure you, it is not betrayal. It is balance. Some children can be relentless. They know how to wear you down with guilt, pressure, and emotional storytelling that makes it seem like you're the only one who can help. But here's the truth. Boundaries without consequences are just suggestions. If your adult child continues to push and push and push, despite your clear boundaries, it's okay to step away. Not with anger, but with strength. You can say, "I love you, but I won't be part of this dynamic anymore." You can end the call. You can walk out of the room. You can protect your heart. And you don't have to explain yourself endlessly. You don't have to justify or defend. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is simply, "No, not anymore." It's in that moment, when you don't bend, that they begin to realize the old patterns no longer work. That their behavior has consequences. That love is not the same thing as obedience. And listen, I know this isn't easy. This is not the fairy tale ending we all hoped for. We wanted to grow older, surrounded by love and respect, not boundaries and distance. But life isn't always tidy. Sometimes love looks like letting go. Not of the person, but of the illusion that things will change if you just try harder. You've already tried. You've done the work. You've shown up. You've sacrificed. Now it's time to reclaim your life, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. Because here's the beautiful part. When you take these steps, when you stop apologizing for things you didn't do, when you stop flattering behavior that hurts you, when you stand your ground and refuse to give in, you start to create space for healing. Not just for them, but for you. You begin to breathe again, sleep better, laugh more. You find joy in the little things, your morning coffee, your favorite music, the sunlight through the window. You reconnect with the people who truly see you. You start becoming the version of yourself you might have lost along the way, the one who is kind and strong and whole. You don't need permission to protect your peace. You don't need to feel guilty for walking away from pain. You've earned your freedom, not just through age, but through experience. And if you ever doubt that, remember this. You are not defined by your child's behavior. You are not responsible for the choices they make as adults. You are not failing because they blame you. You are not wrong for choosing yourself. Let that settle in. Because at this stage in life, you deserve ease. You deserve kindness. You deserve relationships that fill you, not drain you. So if this message has spoken to your heart today, I want to invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. You're not alone, and your voice might just be the encouragement someone else needs to hear. And if this video helped you in any way, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Strong Elderly Life. We're here to support you with practical advice, real stories, and empowering guidance, no matter what stage of life you're in. Let's keep growing. Let's keep standing tall. Let's keep living with courage. Here's to living your best life at any age.